Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it is my pleasure to present today's speaker, Alan Delozier. He is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Catholic Historical Commission and received his doctorate in Irish Studies from Drew University. He has also spoken and written on various topics related to New Jersey history, including what we're going to be talking about today, archival resources and the New Jersey Catholic experience. So welcome, Alan. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us. Before we jump into everything, just a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program today, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Alan has graciously provided me with a handout that I will be sharing in the chat once the presentation gets underway. So please feel free to download that at your convenience. There will be a survey available after this webinar. So if you have time, we ask that you please complete the survey. We always love hearing your feedback. And if you want some more information about the New Jersey Catholic Historical Commission, maybe through their Speakers Bureau or topics that they've written about or records or all sorts of things related to that, their website is on the screen there, and I will make sure that a live link gets sent out in the chat once we get underway as well. All right, before we jump in, I just want to do one last thing and just do a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you are using a PC or a Mac. If you are using a mobile device, it might look a little bit different depending on the device that you're using, but all the features will still be there. Down in your bottom left-hand corner, you have your audio settings, so you can check that to make sure that you're getting the audio through correctly. And if you need to plug in headphones or anything like that, you can adjust your audio settings there. As I mentioned, there is the Q&A or the chat feature as well. You can hit either one of them to send us your questions or even your comments if you would like. And the questions, again, we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the program. And lastly, if you have problems at any point today, there is a raise hand button. You can just hit that. That'll alert me. Then I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm proud to turn it over to Alan.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate your invitation. It's really great to be with everybody here today, and happy belated New Year all around. Andrew's been very kind in terms of setting me up for this presentation today, and I have given it in various forms over the years. So I always put a preface in. My apologies if you know some of the information already, but always good to have a refresher course on anything. I find that to be really exciting, but also in terms of new information, I'm really excited to share this with you. And also it's a learning experience for me too, because I really love to hear feedback from individuals about where their research is and where it's going. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint to go along with the handout that Andrew's going to send to you in a few moments. So if you just bear with me, I'll see what we can find here. Okay. I'm technologically challenged. Thanks for bearing with me. And here we go. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Looks good, Alan.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Okay, so basically, archival resources and the New Jersey Catholic experience. Now, I should preface too that this talk will be mainly on Roman Catholicism as the church in terms of all these subsets that connect to the state of New Jersey and how it's evolved within the Garden State over the years. But I also want to point out the added importance and the details that you can find that other religious, among other religious denominations and connecting to their records as well. So basically in short terms, lowercase c and an uppercase c. So making it universal, which is the meaning of Catholicism in terms of what resources are out there and what best can serve you in terms of what your research needs are in terms of finding answers to questions that you have in terms of not only genealogy, but also regular information on New Jersey related and even topics outside of the state as well. Okay, so without any further ado, let me progress forward. And I do want to start with this. New Jersey is among, most of you know, is one of the most diverse states in the Union. And that only goes for ethnic and cultural diversity, but also religious diversity as well. We have a number of excellent archival repositories in the state. I just pointed out a few here, but also I just want to point out, along with Jewish Metro West, Reformed Church Archives, formerly known as the Dutch Reformed Church, United Methodist Archives at Drew University, and of course, our friends and tremendous resources for everybody within the state, the New Jersey State Archives, and Andrew and his colleagues at the New Jersey State Library. I've used those resources a number of times, and not only religious volumes, but also a wide range of contextual materials. And that's the other C word. I'm always big on context, because context really fleshes out and tells your story in a lot more detail. So just saying this, these particular repositories, I have the links here for you, and they're also on the handout, but also in terms of information about other religious archives across the country, which could have New Jersey content in various ways. Many times religious denominations outside the Catholic Church have a central repository, especially Protestant denominations and ones that are related to other faith-based traditions. Also, Jewish archives have various other sections. There's a tremendous center in New York, YIVO and the Center for Jewish Studies and so forth, for example. And also Islam, Buddhism, and so forth have varying degrees of archival repositories, which touch on their excellent traditions, but also could connect again to New Jersey and Catholicism. So the beauty is collaboration, and also the promise of hopefully some different records that will be helpful to your research as well. I sound like a broken record, but the main thing is success within the research process, and then finding what you need in terms of various locations. Okay, so let's move on to Roman Catholicism in general, just in case you're not familiar with the faith as it is. So basically the definition is here. Basically, baptized is a Christian denomination, and unlike other denominations, it has a hierarchical structure, especially more visible in terms of, as you can see here, Christ is the invisible head, but also the papacy, Vatican City, and also in terms of authority. The Vatican City, a lot of people don't realize, is a city-state, so it's a functioning political unit, but also the Pope, as the known as the Bishop of Rome, is also a spiritual authority. And one of the things that in some quarters, and I had to learn this too, is that the saying the Pope is infallible, that's a misnomer. It's basically he has to be infallible on canon law and legal matters coming out of the church from his jurisdiction. So he has a lot of help in that regard in terms of issuing things. And I only bring that up because a lot of times things such as papal bulls, papal synods, documentation, various encyclicals, which are the big thing that popes release, have to be correct in terms of canonical law. Canon law is basically church law, and going from there. And they're very valuable in terms of research. And those are ones that have been used a lot in terms of my dealings over the years and with others I've talked to. So this just gives you an overview of the church and what it's all about. Okay, and just a very brief overview of Catholicism in America. And again, it touches on New Jersey by extension or directly. After the first era, which was the Spanish and French colonization, we call this the missionary era. This didn't really touch on New Jersey per se. There's a lot of tremendous records at the state archives, and of course, books at the state library that deal a lot with the early settlers, which were from Holland, Sweden, England, and so forth, in terms of early trade routes within what later became New Jersey. But in terms of Catholicism in New Jersey, the direct antecedent was Catholic Maryland. Basically, this was one of the few English colonies which had religious toleration for Catholics back in the day. Pennsylvania being the other one, the Quakers, the Society of Friends, which also has great archival resources in Philadelphia at Swarthmore, Haverford, and so forth. What they do is, in terms of having this distinction, and then the American Revolution comes along, the colonists wins, and they set up the Republic. So basically, the very first diocese, and Catholic Church is broken down by what we call ecclesiastical territories or dioceses or sees. And what happens is that basically the jurisdiction for a particular area usually around a major city or location is what happened. And the first diocese in the country, the new country, was Baltimore. And that covered the entire former 13 colonies in the early republic up until 1809. And at this point, I'm sorry, 1808. And basically at this point, more Catholics were coming in slowly, gradually, and it expanded in terms of other dioceses and geographical areas. And I point out that New York and Philadelphia actually merged and held the Catholic jurisdiction for East and West Jersey, which was the original sectioning of New Jersey before it became a state under the Constitution. So with that said, half the state was under New York's jurisdiction, half under Philadelphia until 1853, when the Diocese of Newark, which covered the entire state of New Jersey, was enacted. And I'll get into more of that later, but I just want to give you sort of the ancient background of what was going on. But all this connects in terms of records and a lot of great story archives, records, and things that have preserved over the years in terms of what's available to the public, in terms of what they can consult and what goes into the research, especially the contextual part of it. Immigration, various building of the Catholic Church in New Jersey and the country, which go interchangeably at this point, seminary, synods, social justice, and so forth. And then even with the practice of the Church, Second Vatican Council. And then we go into the millennium and various changes as well. Okay, so we go into 1853. The first bishop, James Roosevelt Bailey, he was a convert from the Protestant Episcopal Church, and they have a great archival center in Dallas, I believe. And he was named after, as we call Aunt Betty, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, who was the very first American-born saint to be canonized in 1975. Who's the patroness of American parochial education. And actually, we just passed her feast day, which is January 4th. So basically, I mentioned that it encompassed the entire state, and this was until 1881. And this year, various Catholic areas were split because of the growing influx of immigrants from different countries. I mentioned, or we saw on the other graphic on the other slide, mostly Irish, German, French, English, Italian, Polish, and other wonderful nationalities were coming in gradually by this point. There were a lot of revolutions in Europe during 1848, and this was the height of Engoutement for the Irish in terms of the famine, and other economic and logistical issues brought individuals to the United States. And then, as they say, the melting pot theory really came to being, and it was really accelerated during this part in a really profound way. So anyway, with Catholic areas of New Jersey, they were split in terms of geographical location. As you can see here, the Diocese of Newark basically was the northern part of the state, and the Diocese of Trenton was the southern part of the state. So from here, we go into the 20th century, and then even further splits because, again, with density, along with the diversity of populations, 1937 was a landmark date. Newark became an archdiocese, which means that it was the head see for the state of New Jersey, the largest one, and the one that had territorial authority, so to speak. And then the Diocese of Paterson in the north, which currently encompasses, Passaic County, North and Western Jersey for the most part, and then Camden, the extreme south, going around Cape May, Atlantic City, and of course the city of Camden and various counties down there. Then the last split we had was in 1981, Diocese of Metuchen. And as you can see here, it's basically the center of New Jersey, Middlesex, Somerset, and so forth. And then Newark has retained the 4 major counties of northern New Jersey. So this gives you sort of a sense of geography along with other areas to look into. One of the things that's really interesting too, and many of you probably know this already, is date ranges. If you have a major topic and sometimes you need to know the history and then like some of the variations on finding different materials. So anything before 1853, trying to find things at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia archives or the Archdiocese of New York archives, just for one example among many out there. So the beauty of research is finding materials, but also in terms of the investigative prospects that are out there. So that's why I love to hear stories and what people are working on as well. Okay, so basically within the Catholic Church, there's also another split. And this is something that's interesting in terms of geography, but also historical precedent. Um, the Roman Catholic Church, especially within the state, the most um, popular in terms of fellowship and fellowship is basically the Latin Rite, that it's called. This is more in terms of European centered, Western Europe and the Rome, but also we have various other areas, the Eparchy of Passaic and the Eastern Rites. Not quite the Orthodox Church, but it's really close in terms of variation and also in terms of relationship. Both are within the Christian sect, but there's different variations on practice and different like theologies, so to speak, but it's all in the same area, so to speak. So you have Antiochian liturgical rites, the Byzantine family of rites, and the Alexandrian family as well. These are more Eastern, as you can see here, the Epiphany, Coptic, Ethiopia, Greece, and so forth. So all of this said, these particular areas have their own archives as well, and also in terms of their own history, so forth. So if I use, you kind of gathered from now, archives and history interrelated in terms of sort of a broad-based look at different things. But again, I'll be open for questions and your thoughts at the end of the program in terms of specifics you're working on. Okay, starting points, and again, apologies if this is like second nature, but when I deal with a lot of students, it's always great because I have to remind myself, and I have a lot of wonderful people who I work with in terms of, if you're just sort of like stuck on a starting point, the old traditional who, what, where, when, how, and why helps in terms of forming a thesis or a starting point on your outline of research. So again, if this is second nature, my apologies, but also just looking at this, and again, context and the bigger picture. So all that connects together. And then my last commercial message, so to speak, in terms of research, joy and value, is basically going in terms of the inverted pyramid, or the Trinity, so to speak, since we're talking Catholicism, broad to specific. Winnowing it down is really important in terms of what you're finding, not to make yourselves crazy, but also in terms of really focusing upon your particular topic or topics in a certain way. And this is just one example among many out there. So, and I find this helps in terms of novice researchers when they're looking at things as well, along with the last slide. Okay, so just in terms of secondary sources and broader based ones, and I put this in here because some of these things you may not be aware of, or they, again, second nature. Archive Grid is an excellent site, and I think I have that on the handout. If not, I can send people a link to it. This is excellent. It's a site, and I'll talk more about in a minute, that highlights various archival collections. It works by a very powerful keyword search engine in terms of any topic out there, individuals, geographical locations, subject areas, topics, and so forth. National Union Catalog is kind of older in duration, but still helps in terms of finding various items, working with various archival repositories on a one-on-one basis, and Worldcat, which is essentially any book that's available throughout the world that's available for usage, either on-site or through interlibrary loans and various other avenues of exploration. Things like this, and things like the bibliographical guide to periodical literature, which is kind of old but invaluable in terms of things that are usually before 1980 especially. So anyway, a lot of databases out there, and they're constructing new ones along the way, but these are some of the hallmark or bedrock ones that really help in terms of finding not only primary information, but also secondary as well in terms of building it together. Now, I should point out too that, just for the record, primary information is information written by an individual. These usually include letters, manuscripts, things of that nature, autobiographies, newspapers. Secondary are more biographical references done by another individual, which connect to the story of the person, which give greater context and their own thought patterns as well in terms of a particular subject area. Okay. So there's various sections of the Catholic Church I look at. The laity is basically the faithful, those who practice the church. And some of these pictures I put up along the way, photographs I find are an excellent source in terms of information. The old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, or however many words you can find. Great context in terms of descriptive and, in this case, like the wear of the altar boys during the early 1900s, for example, and different descriptions that may not find its way to paper, but you can find it in a visual form, which are invaluable. Nowadays, not only the words, but also not only pictures, but also diaries, journals, and other things. Anything we could find to document the story of a person or place or thing and so forth, invaluable. Okay. So I put this together in terms of family research. Now, this is the biggest area, and this is why I'm covering it a little bit more than other things. But again, it all goes into context in terms of how deep you want to search and how wide you want to search in terms of your Catholic interest in terms of family, but also in terms of the church itself. With that said, registers in the Sacramental rite, these are things that record the information. I'll show you an example in a moment. And then within the Catholic Church, even within the priesthood, the clergy, there's different rites. There's what is called secular priests, which are the most common, which are attached to a diocese. But there's also various religious orders, such as the Society of Jesus, better known as the Jesuits, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Benedictines, and so forth. And then requests. These come in various forms, and usually in terms of canonical law and in terms of diocese, what happens is that a parish is obliged or bound to keep their sacramental records on site unless they close or merge. And then it usually goes to the current church or goes to a certain location with approval of the particular diocese. So with that said, sometimes it might be a little bit extra effort, but at the same time, it's worth it in terms of trying to track down and facilitate your search. Okay, and these are the sacraments within the church. And I say here they're the religious equivalent of civil records. And having both of them is really important because you can really see a parallel in terms of fleshing out your own stories. Now, in terms of the great work that's done in the state of New Jersey in terms of civil records, having even a starting point. And I think a lot of researchers know any shred or scrap of information is invaluable because it helps you move forward in terms of building on that. So any and all information, and a lot of people that I talk to who are not really into genealogy yet, find it interesting that you really have to have so much more information to find more information. And sometimes it's a little bit at a time increments. But with that said, doing the civil records along with the religious records and these sacraments such as baptism, first communion, confirmation, marriage, holy orders if you're going into the priesthood, and so forth. I put out penance and new anointing of the sick, but these are more confidential and more between the individual and the priest and the Lord, so to speak. So these are the main ones that are there, and then you can always do a timeline just like the civil records outlined here. Okay, this is one of our earliest through the Archdiocese of Newark, sacramental registers, St. John's Parish in Newark. You can see the date right at the top, 1832. And I praise anybody who can read 17th, 18th, 19th, even 20th century plus handwriting cursive, because sometimes you had a very neat scribe, sometimes maybe not so neat, but no criticism. It was a time period, and just recording the information is was the main goal. So kudos to everybody. But if you can decipher it in some cases, that's really, I would consider that knowing a second language, being bilingual, so to speak. Now, with that said, I'm just being a little bit light, but at the same time, when you have the information, again, that really helps in terms of at least having a starting point to dive in and investigate further. Now, this one, you can see here, 1832, and on the left-hand side, the ledger, the month and the year. And this is pretty common in terms of the early ones, and I'll explain the variations on that in a moment. But otherwise, you have the surname of the individual, you have the first name, and usually you have the names of the parents, the sponsor, and the priest, conducting the sacrament. And also, as you go later on, I don't have any examples. I sort of didn't put too many in for the sake of confidentiality. And of course, the date range is pretty long, so I don't think we have anybody live to question this. But with that said, I just want to be careful. But I also want to just point out too that other information that you can find on various Catholic sacramental rolls, registers, and so forth, usually include the birthplace, information about the if they had any other sacraments done and so forth. Baptism is the first one. So, but it all varied according to the actual book and what was available on the pages of a ledger. There were different companies producing ledgers, so you have different things to work from. So with that said, it very much evolved from the 1830s onward within Newark in terms of the registers and what was available for people to look at and move on from. So baptism here, marriage here. Just a little bit different according to the 19th century here. Yet still have the date range, but this time you have the individuals joining in wedded matrimony. Of course, you have the first names here, and then you have sponsors and various other information, including the priest and so forth, witnesses and sponsors. So again, same like baptism, different information over the years, which was important. The other thing you want to keep in mind too is a lot of these were written in English, but sometimes you might get Latin, or especially in the later day, maybe Spanish, French, or some other language that may not be English proper. So just keeping in mind translations, and again, the value of information in all its forms that's available out there just to decipher and work from. Okay, parish life. Now, in terms of the Catholic Church, especially in the earlier days, especially immigrants, first, second, third generation, in many cases, parish life was a whole nother world, especially one that dealt with the faith, and it was its own community unto itself. You might hear a lot of information about cities like Newark, Patterson, Trenton, Camden, and so forth, having their own neighborhoods. And then the neighborhoods, were really tight-knit in many cases. And also people speak fondly of it, your own house and so forth. But another neighborhood was your parish. And I hear stories about Brooklyn, and people would, kids would meet on the street. Oh, where are you from? And then they would name their parish, not so much their neighborhood in Brooklyn. So things like that were really interesting. And again, pictures are invaluable. Christ the King Church here. This is a great photo because it just shows parish life at its finest, especially because during the 1930s and 40s, a lot of parishes had their own bands, choral groups, theatrical production companies, and so forth. And of course, the priests were pretty not only dressed with the top hats and canes. Now, this particular picture was in honor of a Holy Name parade. And the Holy Name was quintessential parish life, especially for males who joined to support the priest and the parish they were a part of. And they had parades, pretty much once a month back in that time, the 30s and 40s in particular. And a lot of parishes had these bands which outdid themselves in terms of showmanship and also musicship, and all the tremendous trappings in terms of faith-based demonstration, which again tells the story of the church in a very localized and important form. And here's some of the things that have been coming out of parishes that are helpful for the researcher. Weekly bulletins, invaluable. It's like the newspaper for the particular church. Census reports, the yearly overview of how many individuals attended the parish, their finances, and other information that helps in terms of the statistical parts and the health of a particular church. Again, church productions with the plays and the theatrical groups, and parish histories, mostly secondary sources, but invaluable. And they're not only great for church history if you're doing an updated one, but also learning more about a particular church, but also within the context of the Catholic Church. Parish church histories help in terms of giving a lot of detail on a local level, but also could reflect the wider scope of the church at a particular time when a parish history was published. Okay, ceremonies and observance aren't always captured in many ways, unless you have a tape recorder, a video camera, and so forth. Photos are very good in this regard. Again, here's one of a installation ceremony for one of the auxiliary bishops in the 1940s. And things like this, this part that cuts to the heart, again, of a neighborhood or parish connection in terms of ceremonies and observance, because there's various holy days of obligation within the Catholic Church, which are vital. And this is part of community and building those information structures, not only written, photographic, but also in terms of people you may know and the potential for oral history and so forth as you go forward. Now, things which are important is institutional support too. We think of like churches, edifices, cathedrals, and so forth, which are important unto themselves. But even looking at the levels of Catholic history, you have your higher end, a lot more records, just from the sake of production and attention come from the hierarchy. Bishops, cardinals, and so forth will have a larger number of papers along with different key figures within the administration of a particular time and a particular bishop. When you go down further, if you can find information on the different institutions, the ones that have done the great work but are really documented as well, it's really a windfall. So this is that's one of my favorites, but I've worked with other people on the Mount Carmel Guild, 1930s and 40s, different information. And this was a great project of one of our, Archbishop Thomas J. Walsh, who was Archbishop at the time period. You see here, it says a lot about the time period and the Great Depression context and also specifics. All are welcome free dinners. So that's a great picture. But also in terms of other institutions too, along with the Mount Carmel Guild, different hospitals, not patients' records, because that's the other thing, confidentiality. I mentioned the sacramental certificates, but also you don't want to get into health records, great information for students and so forth. And orphanage records is a question we get a lot of. And we always defer them to an orphanage, and of course going about logical, ethical, and legal considerations, because that's one of the things that archivists, ethics is very huge in terms of basically being a conduit or a messenger or somebody who provides the records, but we don't interpret. That's why we try to put out as many leads as possible so you can find what you need and go from there. But with that said, outside of confidentiality, different societies. The Holy Name Society I mentioned in terms of the parades for the institute, for the parishes, the AOH and the UNICO. AOH is the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and UNICO is United in our Italian company and so forth. I don't have the actual acronym, the actual name right, but I can look that up. But excellent organizations. UNICO does a lot with Italian heritage, culture, and tremendous work in terms of the Italian experience in various ways. And there's a number of chapters in New Jersey, and the AOH as well, which does with Irish connections and promoting that culture as well. The Knights of Columbus do a lot with priests and ceremonies, and they have a really important history as well. They actually have a museum up in New Haven, Connecticut, if you're interested, and an archival connection there. Various Catholic charities, there's different offices. The Mercier Club is one that was intellectual, named after Cardinal Mercier of Belgium, post-World War I, in terms of intellectual discourse, in terms of Catholic Church and so forth. Okay, going to education, I mentioned grades, but education has a lot of forms that you can search from. The history of Catholic higher education is mirrored the history of Catholicism in America. The first Catholic college university was Georgetown, founded in 1789. And from there, various other ones, Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland, 1808, Fordham, Villanova were other early ones, and then moving forward to the great ones in New Jersey, St. Elizabeth, Caldwell, Felician, Georgian Court, and St. Peter's and Seton Hall, so forth. So anyway, not only colleges and universities, but parochial schools, high schools, grammar schools, and so forth important. I can see the priest here is really talking up the storm to the students here. So great pictures that have been discovered over the years. And excuse me for using Seton Hall connections, but basically this just gives sort of a sense. School newspapers, school yearbooks, registers of students, photos of different items of college life, student activities, basically sports, all different things that could enhance the career of a person who was involved in a particular school over the years. If they were active in extracurricular activities, all the better. And the beautiful part, especially of yearbooks, is that you usually get from the late 19th century to roughly, and this is just generalization, late 19th century to about the 1950s, you usually get a list of the activities that individual was involved with. And the beauty of these yearbooks too, in most cases I haven't seen a negative one. A great essay, it's always positive, nothing any negative, nicknames, even photos. This one has childhood photos, which is a bonus, and also a quote. So you really learn more about a person in terms of having yearbooks, especially if you have that information in a particular publication, not only Seton Hall, but other places as well. Okay, again, the clergy, religious orders, as you can see here, various other connections. Say you had a great teacher who taught you at a Benedictine affiliated school, information about their life. If you had an uncle or an aunt in religious life, I've had those questions a lot as well, ancestors and so forth. So these all connect to as people move forward in terms of the research in different areas. And of course, the women as well, sisterhood, the Sisters of Charity, the Sisters of Mercy, the Carmelite sisters, and so forth. A lot of great work being done by the fathers and the sisters, the sisterhoods and tradition, especially within the church. Oh, Andrew, if I go over time, please give me the hook. I'm sorry if I'm if I ramble on too long. Okay. So we have the hierarchy as well. I mentioned that this is the top level of records in terms of volume. Also quality too, because in many cases, and this is logical, business records and ideas and actually authoritative descriptions and documents come from the top. So different things such as pastorals, announcements, editorial policies in newspapers. Any Catholic newspaper you see, and I'll mention those in a minute, is that the bishop usually has the final editorial say. His name might not be in it, but you can sense, their presence within the text that's available. And again, it sort of goes along the line of papal teaching and, well, church teaching overall and what's available. And these particular pastorals and other documents always address a specific topic and are usually issued as needed, but also along the schedule of the holy days of obligation and the calendar, Lent, Advent, and so forth. So all these things work together in terms of telling a story in various ways. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Now we get into a little bit more, everything's fun to me, but and hopefully to you too, because research is fun along with being interesting and very important in terms of perpetuating the stories and the information, but also the fun part, discovery. The aha moment is really rewarding. And whenever I see it in individuals, it really, it's really heartening, but also in terms of life experiences. The Catholic Church is no different in terms of different connections. Along with society, there are some of the negatives that, of course, history isn't always pretty, as you find out through different research channels in different areas. There was a large connection of anti-Catholicism in this country during the 19th century. The Know Nothing Party, the burning of different churches, convents and so forth across the country. But also, how assimilation came and how different Catholic themes, along with those from other cultural, ethnic, and racial groups, really enhanced the overall story of America. And there was also a lot of great ecumenicalism, interfaith dialogue, and connections. With that said, different things such as secular entertainments like movies, sports events, concerts, and so forth, which featured Catholic connections, such as the Academy Award winning Going My Way in 1944. And it's actually one of the first movies to spawn a sequel, The Bells of St. Mary's, the following year. And, excuse me. Sorry, everybody. Woke up with a dry throat this morning. My apologies. Okay, so going my way, movies with a theme of Catholic priest and a Catholic experience, sporting events, different Catholic colleges and universities and so forth. And of course, music. Music goes across all boundaries and has a lot of great, different genres and formats. So things like this are really important in terms of sharing with your family and that shared experience overall. Okay, so if we can get this. Good. Okay, and these are variables again within the context and the greater thing. Trends, I mentioned the timeline of America, but also the Catholic Church. Vatican II was very important. Just to give you an example, masses were conducted in Latin with the priest or the altar boy who intoned a lot of the dialogue during a mass faced the altar, and they had altar rails and different forms of distributing communion. After Vatican II, it was a case of not having it in Latin so much as the vernacular of a particular country. So American churches turned to English, and the priests and the altar boys faced the congregation instead of having their backs to them. And of course, the value of diversity, very important as well, as I mentioned previously. Immigration trends too. What traditions, like say the Polish church brought to American Polish activity, Lithuanians, Irish, German. And then you go into the wonderful part about South America, Asia, Africa, and then their traditions coming in. In Newark alone, there's over 25 different nationalities or ethnic groups who have contributed to the Archdiocese in some way. So it's really interesting and very heartening and valuable to see what they've contributed to the story overall. Social history, name changes, variations, especially on names you're looking for genealogy, and just making sure other gaps and deficiencies in the search. Some people never stop searching, which is really good. I always hope for people to find like that utopia of exhausting every source, but you never know. Sometimes there's that mystery or that doubt in one's mind, myself included, in terms of there must be something more out there. So my hope for you in the new year is that you find everything you need, but also having peace of mind, but also success all along the way in terms of your searching. Now we get into newspapers. I mentioned that briefly. Now, in terms of Catholic newspapers, these are very specialized. Of course, dailies, New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth. National news. Sometimes Catholic stories will get in there, especially if they're very major. And of course, I won't shirk this one. It's like, unfortunately, the scandals among the clergy these days. It's one of those things that unfortunately happens, and I'm not going to comment on it one way or the other. But just suffice to say, if you're looking for information from a repository, you might have to wait or work with the diocese official, to have access, making the request in terms of maybe not that particular topic, but something else entirely. So just keep in mind that that's some of the things that are being worked on in terms of this unfortunate situation. So it's full disclosure. Again, history is not pretty, but at the same time, things that are public are really more accessible at this point, but just trying to give you the overall scope. Social justice, the National Union, Father Coughlin, who was unfortunately controversial as they will put it that way. But then you have the other end of it, Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker, which was more left, as Father Coughlin was right in terms of what they produced in the 1930s and 40s. And this is the illustration that was in the editorial section of the first Catholic Advocate, the Archdiocese of Newark's newspaper in 1951. So you see what they were trying to do right away, again, from their bishop, who was Archbishop Walsh, still at this time. And then we have other specializations, our area. This is one of our first newsletters and things that we were doing in terms of stories related to different aspects of the Catholic experience in New Jersey. And of course, down here, you have other publications as well, directories, almanacs, and so forth. A lot of this, again, mirrors like the mainstream. World almanacs, Catholic almanacs, phone books, Catholic directories, and so forth. Going backward, but even coming up to the present day, and then even trying to find different formats and different ways that information has been disseminated and shared with others, especially in this age of technology, along with looking back at the ones that have been formed and also saved in various older traditional formats. Okay, now this is some of the sites that I briefly talked about earlier. And this is a new one that I'm bringing up, Archival Resources for Catholic Collections. This one is mainly dealing with different religious orders, especially nuns and so forth. This is fairly new, and the URL is down here. I believe I put this in the handout as well. If you're interested in doing different research on the valuable sisters and what they've been doing over the years, this is a great site to check out. And here's some other ones as well. This one has been produced over the last 25 years, the Catholic Research Resources Alliance. They have a lot of excellent digitized newspapers from across the country, different Catholic ones, including the Catholic Advocate. The American Catholic Historical Association, is basically, they do a lot with conferences and more academic-based materials, but they're a good place in case you need somebody to help with research, or if you want to learn more about what people are working on as well. These are all great sites, including the Association of Catholic Diocesan. So you can maybe get an insight too about what different dioceses might have in terms of what you're looking for outside of Newark and the New Jersey ones. And I mentioned Archive Grid as well. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to show these to you, but I do have the links for you. And Archive Grid, again, basically scours the country and the world in terms of different manuscript collections that have been processed. It's a work in progress. Not everything is on that site yet, but they're working hard to populate it as best as possible. And we have various projects in the commission. Sorry for this commercial, but at the same time, these are free of charge. We can help you download these. Mr. Carl Gans, one of our members, put in a Catholic Historian's Handbook to look at different sources. He keeps updating it as well. I think the last version is a little bit old. It's 2010 or 11/12. With that said, he's working on a new one. So things like that. Some things never go out of style or use, but at the same time, just keeping up with the current, especially electronic, digital trends that are out there. And here's the cover or the interface for the Catholic Research Resources Alliance. Just more information. It's called the Catholic Portal. Uncommon materials, a lot of information, especially catalogs, finding aids, the bedrock of the archival world in terms of giving a description of our collections and others' collections out there, and things like that within the site. So it's a great search tool. It has a great search engine, and it's been valuable for a lot of Catholic-based researchers. And I should point out too, even if you're looking at other religious denominations, doesn't hurt to check it out. Again, interfaith research is really key, and things like this in terms of the Jewish tradition, the Muslim tradition, Protestant, and so forth. Great in terms of finding things that are interchangeable, but also great in terms of sharing information leads. Okay, Catholic News Archives, which is part of the CRRA. See the logo up here. And this just shows you what's available in terms of your toolbar on the side. And this is what it looks like. It's a PDF. It looks how it would appear if you had the original in your hands. And this is what we have so far, and still working to get them all digitized, 58 to 76. Sorry for the plug here, but other things too we have are different search engines in terms of our own site, and this is representative of all the other wonderful sites out there too. St. Peter's and the other Catholic institutions, and I'll talk to my great friends at Rutgers, Princeton, Fairleigh Dickinson, and so forth. All the great colleges and universities of New Jersey and across the country have different variations and different volumes in terms of their search engines and also their finding aids. Okay, so we're in the home stretch here. These are some Catholic diocesan sites, just to save you steps if you're interested in terms of their archives or asking questions. And again, here's some more information. I told you about the Catholic Diocesan Archivist before. The USCCB is the Bishops' Conference, and they go back to the pre-World War I era, the Great War, in terms of what they've been doing. And they have a lot of records that trace Catholicism from the 20th century forward. And again, hierarchy and diocese. Okay, Find My Past. This is a great tool for genealogists as well. Catholic Heritage Archive. It comes, as you can see here, out of Irish, English, and Scottish Catholic records. But they're coming to the United States, and we're working on them with them to try and facilitate various agreements. Because I'll talk to you in a moment about the LDS Church, and unfortunately, there's a papal edict as of 2007-8, I believe, where Catholic records cannot be digitized by the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, just because there was some theological question or something like that. Again, no editorial. It's just a matter of that was the news that came out of Vatican City. So this is one site that's really helpful. It hasn't touched New Jersey yet, but I believe the Archdiocese of New York, and I think Philadelphia has just signed on too, among others. So you can check that out if you like. Different reference areas. Again, this is probably second nature, but just putting them out there. Reference sources, websites, finding aids, encyclopedias, and so forth. Even finding that specific information to build on, there's nuggets of data that you can mine and go forward on. Okay, just more specifics. In terms of like academic databases too, can be very helpful. Jstor, LexisNexis, historical abstracts, and so forth. A lot of these have full text capabilities, which is great because it's sort of one-stop reference and research and saving the information and details you need. And other ones that are real specific and of course specialized: oral histories, the value of diaries and journals. I don't know how many of you keep journals or diaries anymore, but I think these are becoming rarer and rarer to find, especially in the last few decades. Letters, scrapbooks, Bibles, anthologies, of course, objects, three-dimensional, and so forth. So things like that, and of course, Bibles, because a lot of times family history is written in Bibles from older generations, and of course, the great state of New Jersey and its history and the contextual attributes that go along with the specifics that people have saved over time. Okay, more of the same. Okay, and I put this down in terms of local libraries. These are the ones that are more Catholic-based. These are the ones that are more broad-based again. And I should point out too, our friends at Drew, they have a tie into the Reformed Church, the Methodist Church. Princeton Theological goes along different lines. Princeton was founded by the Presbyterian Church, and Rutgers was founded by the Dutch Reformed Church. So different variations of records, especially their early years, are connected here. And also, these are some additional ones that I find really interesting. Again, other religious denominations and also the Catholic Church. Daily Princetonian is online, and they got a grant to do this, and it's really fascinating to see what they've produced over the years. The Daily Princetonian, deals with Princeton news specifically, but also in terms of the community around there. The Princeton Whig was a political organ, and it was really anti-Catholic in the 1840s. It was like a vehicle of the Know Nothing Party and so forth. Then we go into the Library of Congress and newspapers.com. These are great for obituaries and other types of stories that do hit the mainstream, but also might be more localized. And in many cases, Catholic stories, if they were local, they made the local smaller market newspapers, smaller cities, smaller towns, and so forth. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of stories in that way. And then HathiTrust, if you haven't used this is really tremendous. You can find a lot of older, out of copyright, obscure materials through this site, directories and various other out of print publications. So each of these are highly recommended. I'll just say one more thing. College newspapers, not only Princeton, but other colleges around the country are slowly but surely getting their newspapers digitized and available for others. Okay, I teach a course, but I only put this up here because there's different workshops, different individuals who are teaching over the years. And Catholic information is out there, especially with other theological courses, even auditing courses, especially in the history of Judaism, Protestant churches, Islam, and so forth. All this can tie in together in terms of if you want to go the extra mile in terms of enrolling in a course, even auditing it so you don't get a grade, but still learning at the same time. And sorry, this is the last one for us, the commission. Our site is here. And I will point out too that we not only support scholarship in terms of the basically the inspiration or the research value, but we also give grants in terms of different research projects, initiatives, and so forth. So if you check out our site, you can see some of the things we're offering in terms of what's moving forward. And a lot of things we do, especially is in terms of publication. If we can help you in that regard, we're really humbled and appreciative of anything we can do for you. And that's the site as well, just basically the interface. And then going back to the LDS and their church, and this just gives you the overview of why, things haven't happened. But I do want to put in one thing. It's interesting, back in 1976, before all this happened, our leader, Archbishop Peter Garrity, had one question, basically, how much did it cost? And the LDS said it was free of charge, which it is. It's free for everybody who wants to scan their materials. So we went with it without looking at the theological background. So that's why we have a lot of things on microfilm at this point within our collection. Okay, and current things as well. Digitization, unfortunately, slavery references, not so much in New Jersey, but other states. I haven't found anything because slavery was outlawed within New Jersey way back in the 19th century before the Archdiocese was formed. Restrictive usage, again, secret archives in Vatican. So all these things, there's a lot of interesting things to explore, but just keeping in mind the context and details of what's involved. Of course, personnel records, and then patience is a virtue in many ways. In terms of waiting for records, especially at this time of COVID, quarantining, and certain repositories are closed or on reduced hours. So thank you for understanding about this, and again, full disclosure about what the situations are out there. And that's me, and I'm very happy to again answer your questions, provide moral support, but also learn from you, especially in terms of what you're doing, and any comments, con or pro, about the presentation or any research you're looking at. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you being here today.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Alan. If anybody has any questions, we're going to move into our Q&A session. So please feel free to post them either in the chat or in the Q&A feature in the dashboard. So first and foremost, it looks like in the handout that you provided, the second to last link for your LibGuide isn't working, and I tested it out and it's not for the Seton Hall LibGuides.
It's ironic, it's a Seton Hall one. I'll be happy to fix that. Thanks, Andrew. I can send out another copy.
Sure, yeah, that's fine. And then I'll send it out to everybody that has the corrected
Great,
link.
Thanks so much. And I'm not forcing it on anybody. It's there for reference if you need it. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for pointing that out. Sorry about that.
No.
Okay.
Is there an organization comparable to yours that covers Pennsylvania Catholic records or specifically Philadelphia records?
Thanks, Andrew. That's interesting because we're the only, I won't say the only, I'll say this, there's nothing in Pennsylvania per se, except for statewide, I should say, sorry. There's something called the Western Pennsylvania Catholic Society, which is tremendous. They do things west of Harrisburg. That's why I had to think for a second. There's nothing statewide, but they do a lot of things. They have a regular journal, newsletter, email source, website, and so forth. If anybody's interested in that, if you want to save steps, I'm happy to send you a link to what they do. So Pennsylvania, yes, half of it anyway. And the only other one I've seen in the country is Texas. There's a Texas Catholic Historical Society. They have a very detailed and very strong presence in the state. They do a major journal, and they have a lot of connections and resources. And it's a really thriving organization. So hopefully there's going to be more out there.
All right. And one thing to for at least for Philadelphia records, in that the St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Wynwood, I did some work for them, and they have an extensive archives there. So if you're looking for records for that area, that has to do maybe with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, I would check there and see what they have.
Great. Andrew, I liked you already. I didn't know you worked there. I worked there briefly too. So you're absolutely right.
I did some cataloging for their pamphlet collection. So
Beautiful. This is good.
let's see. Okay, the next question. I had two aunts who were nuns in the Society of the Holy Child Jesus in Drexel Hill. My one aunt was sent to Rome and was a secretary to Pope John Paul. Where can I find any records from her?
Excellent. Thank you. Hey, we're gonna tap Andrew again. Basically, if you reach out to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia Archives, known as the PARC, which is the acronym. I don't know if I put. Forgive me, my memory is kind of squirrely today. If I didn't put that in the handout, I can send that too as well, along with New York. Sorry, I'm diverging a little bit, but they might have something. But also in terms of finding the archives of the order, is usually the best way to go. If not from a local standpoint, if they're not in operation anymore, the National Archive is usually the way to go. And let me just make sure, Holy Child of Jesus, Drexel. And I can reach out to you, further if you like. I just don't have these precise answers on the top of my head. So thanks for your understanding.
All right. I'm seeking my maternal grandparents' information. My grandfather was born in Ireland and had his baptism, and he moved to Brooklyn, and they're looking for marriage license, funeral details, and headstones. Any suggestions?
Okay. For American records or for Ireland?
For American, they moved here. So
sorry, just want to make sure. Okay. Okay, that's another one I'd have to probably look at. Probably a starting point. There's a great site out there. Some people mock it, but it's called Find the Grave. If you're not familiar with it, you can use any search engine, Google or what have you. And if they have the headstone, they have like just basic information to start from. But with that, in terms of going back, if they're American records, I'm not sure, is it New Jersey based or is it another state?
It looks like he moved to Brooklyn. So
okay, Brooklyn. Yep, I know Brooklyn has a wonderful archive, the Diocese of Brooklyn. And I think if I remember correctly, they don't have a central location for parish records, but don't hold me to that. They don't do genealogy at that site. But with that said, they could probably direct you to the right church. And here's the thing too, if somebody doesn't know the exact church, if they have a neighborhood or at least a geographical swath or proximity, usually they can tell what parishes are in that area. Or if it's a national or ethnic parish, that as well, things that if you don't know, because sometimes we get questions, a Catholic church, sacrament in Newark during such and such a year, but there were 30 plus churches in Newark, which, we appreciate the question. It's just, I feel bad because it delays a little bit because we'd have to look, and we're happy to look. It's just a matter of just finding the right match. So I'm happy to follow up on that one too.
Are the Dutch Reformed church records open to the public? Are they in New Brunswick?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for all these. These are all excellent questions. This one's good because I've never had to, you're the first person who's actually asked about a referral. I know they're active. I think they're taking researchers. It is in New Brunswick, and I can, I did provide the link on that, but I know for a fact that the director, Mr. Ruscasero, who was there for a number of years, just retired last year, and his son has taken over. So there's a great continuity. With that said, I think they, depending upon COVID, quarantine protocols, I think they're still open for research, but I'm sure they can help you out in terms of different records. It's a great tradition in terms of record keeping and so forth. And I think that, well, that's actually the national base. They have another place in Michigan, but I think if you go to the New Brunswick site, they should be able to help you out in a really good way.
All right. My uncle became a priest in the early 60s. He was in New York City, but was later located to Paterson, New Jersey. I don't know what order this was or any information, so where would be the best place to start?
Great. Thanks. Another excellent question. I know the archivist, and all of this, I should say, is not about me. It's about just acquired knowledge that I'm happy to pass along. Monsignor Raymond Kupke is the diocesan archivist. He's tremendous. He's a wealth of knowledge. I say that because the Patterson archives would be the place to go to. Do you know the religious? If you know the religious order, I can try and help you out as well, along with Monsignor Kupke, on archives for the Jesuits, Franciscans, or what other order you're looking for.
Yeah, they said that they don't know the order.
Gotcha. Okay, so if they have a record, and you know what, I might be able to help too, because we have directories. I mentioned that in the talk. I might be able to get you going because directories have a have year by year what priests were affiliated with a diocese. So that's something to start on, including religious orders and diocesan priest or secular priest. So I'm happy to follow up with you. And sorry if I ramble. My mind's going a million miles an hour. It's like I think if we're in that research for fraternity sorority is basically about you're thinking so many different directions. So, but I'm happy to follow up. Thanks.
Can you repeat the name of the I think was it the Monsignor?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
For Paterson.
Monsignor Raymond Kupke, Kupke.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm going to just put your email in the chat right now, so if anybody wants to reach out to you, they have that contact information.
Great, thanks so much, Andrew.
Sure. Can you review again what happens to records in combined parishes, especially in the Diocese of Trenton?
Oh, great, thank you. This goes according to, I can even give you a personal take on this. Unfortunately, there's a great archivist in Trenton, Miss Tanya. If you just give me one moment, I'll talk and then I'll give you the name of her in a second. And I'm coming back to your question too. Essentially, in terms of records, when a parish closes, by financial or some other means, the problem is that, basically a lot of people don't know what to do with it. But here's the thing, usually by canon law, it's supposed to go to a designated church if it doesn't merge with another one. But if it merges, what happens is that the records go to that particular parish, and then they have their own records that have been in existence, but also add that to their particular holdings collection. Sorry, I'm like dragging this out. I'm just trying to think of Trenton. And my own example is St. Francis of Assisi was a parish I went to as a child, and it merged with, I believe, St. Hedwig's, which was the Polish National Church in Trenton. And the records from St. Francis were transported there. And now I think that our, here she is. Okay. The archivist for the Diocese of Trenton can help you out a lot better, or even that, giving you information about, status, or, even the parish information, about how to contact them. Her name is Miss Tanya Taylor Norwood. Taylor, Taylor hyphen NORWOD, and she's excellent. And she's been there about a year and a half, so she can probably help you a lot more in terms of direction and more details on how the Diocese of Trenton has handled their own mergers and campus. Parish records, Sacramental records. Sorry for my voice, everybody. Thank you. I'll try not to be so long-winded too. Thank you.
There are a few references in the presentation that weren't available in the handout. One was a link about nuns, and the other one was a slide with county historical sites.
Okay.
People were just wondering if maybe you could show them again or just provide them maybe in an updated handout or something, so that they could.
I could put that in a handout, and I can send the PowerPoint if you're interested too.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the questions too. Thanks.
I'm looking for a grandmother who was a member of the Third Order of St. Dominic in New Jersey. How can I find records?
Another excellent question. Third Order laity. Okay, this will be an interesting one. I probably have to consult with you separately. Just off the top of my head, Caldwell College has various Dominican records of various kinds. I think it's more on the religious side, but since there's connections to lay groups, like the Third Order Dominicans, that might be a good starting point. But I might have to look at where other collections are in terms of what's out there and consult with other colleagues and archivists. And let me just point out too, if I haven't gotten this point across, people in the field are incredibly helpful and kind and thoughtful and want to help you, as well. It's like heartening. I say that word a lot because it is. Different archivists out there want to help you, find the story. So if it goes through a couple of individuals, sort of like a relay race, thanks for your patience, but it's a matter of just trying to be thorough and as comprehensive as possible. Okay, I'll come back to this. I'd have to look that up in more detail, but Caldwell will be a starting point, just to give you something to think on. And I'm glad to follow up with you. Thank you so much.
All right. How much overlap, if any, was there between the Greek Catholic and Roman Catholic communities in Passaic in the 1890s, specifically related to Slavic immigrants? A little bit of context, trying to track down records from my great-great-grandparents who lived there, but I'm not clear on whether they were both Roman Catholic or just the maternal side. So my great-great-grandfather was noted as buried in the Greek cemetery, which Slavic researchers have indicated was Greek Catholic.
Okay, another excellent question. As you're saying this, I'm writing it down. This is one I don't know, and I'll be the first to admit I don't know. There's a lot of these I don't know specifically. I'd have to look at the basically over the overview of like how the different religious orders like interacted and what the percentages and mixtures were. But I think this is one that it's more detail oriented. I think the that area especially was more heavily Eastern Catholic, or because the eparchy is up there. But again, I'd have to look at what parishes, both Latin and Eastern Rite, are up there, and also this sort of ties into again the Diocese of Patterson too. I'm not passing the buck, so to speak. It's a matter of just thinking it through. And again, broken record. But really I'm happy to follow up with you. I'm glad to, flesh this out a little bit more for you as you go on the search. So I'm happy to do that for you.
All righty. Well, I don't see any more questions, so I think we can go ahead and end it there. As I said, I did post his email in the chat, so please, if you have any other personal questions or want more help with specific research, you can certainly email Alan. I'll also include his email in the follow-up email that I'll be sending everybody. That'll have a link to the recording, the PowerPoint slides that Alan's going to be sending me, as well as the handout as well. So please look out for that. It'll probably be on Tuesday, since the library is closed on Monday for Martin Luther King Day. But please just look out for that. If you don't receive anything, you can always please feel free to email me or Alan for further assistance. So that we will say, I just want to thank you again, Alan. It's a fantastic presentation. Religion and religious archives can be pretty tricky. And that's so you kind of demystified a lot of things. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much again, Andrew. I really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody too for your questions and being here. Thanks. All the best, everybody.
All right. Yes, and thank you all for coming. Please look on our calendar for our upcoming events and be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you soon. Thank you.